as I mentioned, this is our talk on converting your lawn with sheet mulching, a topic we thought was very needed during this drought by Radhika Thekkath. Before we get um, before we get started with our presentation, um, we would like to acknowledge that all the work done by our Santa Clara Valley chapter of CNPS lies in the homeland of the Muwekma Ohlone, the Ama Mutsun tribal band, the Tamyan Nation, and the Ramaytush Ohlone. This land was theirs for thousands of years, but was taken forcibly from them. Despite 2 centuries of oppression and genocide, they still live and thrive in this area today. We acknowledge and respect them for their land stewardship, culture, language, and humanity. The Santa Clara Valley chapter of CNPS hopes to learn from them and support their work to restore traditional practices and heal from historical trauma. These talks are put on by a team. I am your host, Madeline Morrow. Our question and answer moderator is Stephanie Morris. We welcome our YouTube moderator, Shiho Amster, and our tech tonight is Vivian New, and Radhika is our featured speaker. And if you don't know, CNPS is a nonprofit environmental organization. It's now got over 10,000 members in 35 chapters, which is a lot of growth since 1965. The chapters are all over California and Baja California. Our chapter, the Santa Clara Valley chapter, covers Santa Clara and southern San Mateo counties. And we are part of implementing the CNPS mission to save California's native plants and habitats by bringing together science, education, conservation, and gardening to power the native plant movement. And we would encourage you to join this movement. You can be part of this conservation effort. Every member makes us more powerful. You get benefits too. There are 2 great journals, Artemisia, which is more science-y but still accessible, and Flora for general purpose readership. Both of these journals feature fantastic photographs. We have the Blazing Star chapter newsletter. There are discounts at various nurseries, and it's easy to join. You go to the state website, www.cnps.org/join, and we'd love to hear how you heard about this talk tonight, especially if this is your first talk with us. Welcome. We'd love to hear from you in the chat how you found out about us. We have lots more talks coming up. There's more in addition to this, but if you are interested in gardening, native plant gardening, we have a talk about month-by-month tasks and maintenance with Helen Popper next week, and several conservation talks coming up, protecting San Francisco Bay from invasive Spartina, and conservation of a rare redwood forest endemic, Dudley's lousewort, and paintbrushes in peril, rare Castilleja species of North America. And there are more talks we're working on filling in between those. So they're listed on our website at cnps-scv.org. You can also find them on Meetup, and they're announced weekly on our chapter news mailing list. We have a native plant nursery. It's at Hidden Villa, and because Hidden Villa has summer camps, we are now on our restricted summer sales. We know some people want to buy plants, so for orders 250 and over, we'll deliver your plants if you live between Belmont and San Jose. And this is a volunteer operation, so all the proceeds benefit our chapter. In addition to plants, we have t-shirts from our garden tour, some of the designs you can see there. We have some books. And you can see our plants by going to our online Square site. You don't really have to write down that long URL, because if you just go to our main website, cnps-scv.org, you look for gardening nursery, it will take you there. So I've been mentioning the mailing list. This is how you subscribe to our mailing list. It's an announcements only mailing list. You get a weekly email. And once again, you don't have to write this whole thing down because you can find it on our website. And the website's there at the left bottom. Many of the photos that you have been seeing on these slides, if they aren't credited, our chapter president, Vivian, and nursery manager, Vivian New, took most of them. She's an awesome photographer. So if you like our virtual events, and you have a little time, we'd love to have you join our team. We have two pretty simple roles. The question and answer moderator presents viewer questions. And because we simulcast on Zoom and YouTube, the YouTube moderator transfers questions from YouTube to Zoom, and it's a behind-the-scenes role. And you don't need to be a super techie to do this. You just need to be able to do a keyboard and you have to be able to use a keyboard and a mouse, switch between windows, and copy and paste between windows. So you can contact me or Johanna Kwan. The emails are down there if you are interested. And the way we are going to run this talk, just remember to mute your microphones, but you can type your questions or comments into the chat at any time. We expect to finish by 9. And the simulcast on YouTube will be available later. The recording will be available on YouTube. So if you like this talk and you want to refer to it later, it will be there on our channel, or you can tell your friends about it and they can watch it afterwards. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker. Radhika Thekkath is a retired computer scientist who has been gardening with native plants and has been an active member of our chapter for over 10 years. She recently returned to California after a 3-year stay in Washington State. Her more recent work includes active forestry management and stewardship, as well as sustainable building with cob and straw bale. She is a certified permaculture designer. So take it away, Radhika.
Thanks, Madeline. Let me share my screen here. Okay. Can you all see my screen?
Looks good.
Excellent. Okay. So this talk is about converting your lawn with sheet mulching. Now, people also call it sheet composting or grass composting. So whatever name it goes by, the basic principle is taking a live turf grass and turning it basically into good compost that nourishes your soil, so you can then use that area for planting other things. So let's get started. If I can get my screen to move. There we go. So before we dive into how to do sheet composting, I would like to spend a little bit of time talking about why remove the lawn. I'm sure some of you are here today because you have made the decision to remove your lawn, but some of you may be here today because you're thinking about, should I remove the lawn? Does it make sense for me? Why should I do it? So let's talk about this a little bit. Most lawns, not all of them, in California on the West Coast, is composed of grasses that are native to either the East Coast or Europe, sometimes from China and Japan also. Now, typically, these grasses, not being native to our Mediterranean type of climate, where it is, dry in the summer, require summer irrigation. And, if it's native to a place where there is rain in the summer, like the East Coast or many parts of Europe, not all parts of Europe, then naturally these grasses, as you know, you've been using a sprinkler system on them for years now, probably daily in the summer, to give it the moisture it needs to stay healthy, to stay green, and so on. So what happens really is that there is this grass that's not native to California, that's native to somewhere else, that needs summer irrigation. And then the combination of the water and the sunlight makes it grow. And so you have a lawnmower, or you hire someone to mow that lawn, possibly with a gas lawnmower. And then the clippings are then gathered up, put in someone's truck, and driven to a landfill most often, until quite recently, in many cities, you just have to take this grass clippings to the landfill. And then, in order to keep this grass nice and green and healthy, you had to add fertilizers. In order to keep weeds out of your grass area, you added herbicides. And if you live in the Bay Area, then most of the runoff from the lawn water basically goes into your storm drains, which flow into the bay. So here are your fertilizers and your herbicides now flowing into the storm drain, into the bay. And well, that's not great, because what it does is these chemicals going into the bay water definitely damages the ecosystem of the bay as well. It impacts the algae and the plants that grow there. It impacts the shrimps and the little creatures that are then eaten by life forms like the fish. So here you are, you think you have a small bit of lawn, what harm can that do? But if you combine everybody's lawns and you think about the runoff into the bay, you think about the water usage, it actually does a lot of harm overall. And if you don't have a lawn and you don't have to water your lawn, then obviously you're saving a lot of water usage as well. Now, in a drought situation, what do? You can continue to water your lawn until the city, mandates, or the county mandates how much water you can use, and then you have to let the lawn die. So there is a better alternative to this, obviously, which is, removing the lawn and replacing it by something that's alive and that provides the necessary basis to grow back the ecosystem. If you have ever gotten down close to a green lawn and observed it really well, what do you not see? You don't see many insects there, typically. That's because non-native grasses are not really attractive to the local insects. The local birds typically don't use it for even nesting material or food. And there is more than adequate scientific evidence now that there is a 40 to 45% decline in the insect rate globally. It's not just, it's not just in the US, or it's not just in North America, it's all over the world. And so we have to do our bit to try and retain what we have left, even if we cannot bring back what we've already lost. There are tons of scientific studies, and I've just mentioned one of them. I think this was from a Smithsonian magazine on the insect decline rate. So these are many reasons why it makes a lot of sense to remove your lawn. So what did I do? Well, in 2009, I sheet mulched the back lawn in my Palo Alto house. The total area of lawn that I removed was approximately 600 square feet. I was trying to calculate how much it was. It is basically a circle. I had a circular lawn, and there were little arc portions on either end that I had, there was a tree with a swing set on it for my kids were little. And then the other end had a little fire pit area, which we haven't used in about 12 years, I think, although the area still exists. And you'll see this in the photographs. So this area is now a native meadow. And I don't know if any of you watched my Going Native Garden tour, Rosewood Garden tour that I did in early June, I believe, where you'd have seen many pictures of this native meadow. This native meadow has native plants that are highly valued for its benefits to insects, all kinds of bees. We have seen 8, 9, even 10 different types of native bees in this backyard, butterflies, all kinds of birds. I have a pond with a waterfall as well. So in this situation with the drought, the pond has tremendously benefited all the birds. They come for the water. And these plants also have medicinal use, and they bring joy to the family. All right, so this is the before picture. So this is actually a circle. This photograph doesn't show the whole thing. There's a little bit of the circle to the left. There's a little bit more to the right. And in the far distance, you can see the little fire pit area, the spa behind the circle on the left. Now, this was May of 2009. So that summer, I did not water my lawn, and this is what it looked like in September. Parts of it looked like this in September. So what happened in September? What happened in 2009? So I do tend to read and watch scientific reports on what's happening in the world with climate change, the global temperature rise, etc. So 2009, the official report came out in January of 2010, at the end of the decade. So this is an extract from a specific NASA report, which basically said that the last decade has brought temperatures to the highest levels ever recorded. So this is from 2000 to 2009. And the last year of the decade, 2009, is actually tied for the second warmest year in modern record. And this was, this is the NASA, this is using the NASA's analysis of global surface temperature from weather stations all over the world, as well as satellite data, I believe. So the GIS, which is the Goddard Institute of Space Science, temperature charts for the decade 2000 to 2009, and the year 2000, I'm going to show you in the next slide. But I just want to make a small comment that since 2009, the record's been broken again. Okay, we've had a couple of years when it's been now recorded as the warmest and second warmest year. So things are just getting worse. And this was 12 years ago. So this chart is from the 2010 for the decade 2000 to 2009. Anything that is white globally here implies there was no change in the average temperature. Anything that is blue, as you see, there's a little bit of blue at the bottom there, meant the temperatures were colder. And anything that's orange or red is the increase in temperature range. That is the deviation from the normal for that decade. And as you see, the deviation from normal is pretty extensive globally, and particularly intense at the poles. And this is for the whole decade. Now, this is just for 2009. And watching the trend for that decade is the reason I did not water my lawn that summer and decided to get rid of it in 2009. And as you see, 2009 was particularly bad in the North Pole area, although North America per se didn't show a significant difference. There were significant differences across North Africa, Europe, parts of Asia, Siberia, etc. So this was pretty dramatic. The California Natural Resource Agency in 2009 put out a climate adaptation strategy, basically alarmed by this decade-long increase in high temperature. Now, this is easy to find on the california.gov website. I just extracted, it's a long report, okay? There's lots of stuff in there. I just extracted a small paragraph on the precipitation models that were run by the Scripps Institution of Oceanography. Now, this basically says that by mid-century, there's going to be a small to significant overall decrease in rainfall. Now, because of the global temperature, that half-degree temperature rise globally and across North America, what happens is, even if you have, a particular year, if you have even more snowfall than usual in the winter over the mountains, and we all rely on this snowfall, the snowbank for much of our water, because of this slight increase in temperature, that snow melts a lot quicker. And because it melts earlier and quicker, we have more severe flooding that happens in the early springtime. And when there is a flood situation, then the earth doesn't have the time to absorb that water, and the water runs off mostly into the ocean eventually. And the slight increase in temperature also increases the evaporation everywhere, right? It's not just from rivers or lakes or ponds, but also from the earth, from the desert, from trees, from everywhere. And so this makes for a generally drier climate. And as you can see, in the 10, 11 years that have gone by since this prediction, this is pretty much the case. This is what's happening at the moment. This climate adaptation strategy was updated in 2014, just 5 years after it came out, because things just worsened. And in fact, they're rewriting it again for this year. So the Newsom government, with many agencies, are in the process of rewriting this climate adaptation strategy. You can go to the website. There are workshops this year, and there's citizen input that you can contribute to this to see what's going on. So anyway, so this is drought, in one of its more severe forms. The combination of multiple factors, but these factors are not in our favor at the moment. So since 2009, after you saw the picture of the lawn I showed you and how it dried out, this is what that area looked like this spring for me. This was the picture of my meadow, my native meadow, in April and May of this year. So as you can see, this doesn't look like a desert. This doesn't look desolate. This is, we love it. It's beautiful. And you can do this, you can do this by choosing plants that are appropriate for the dry climate, for choosing to somehow capture and capture more water than you captured before on your land, even if there's less rainfall. So there are strategies that you can employ beyond sheet mulching, and maybe there are other talks that will cover that to enable you to do this. So what I'm advocating is that you not just build drought resilience for your garden, but build drought resilience for your whole family, for everything. So the first step is to safely remove your water-thirsty lawn, and that's what today's talk is going to be about. But go beyond that. Design and plant hardy native plants that will thrive on low water and will support pollinators. So you want to bring back the bees and the butterflies and the birds and support them. So there are other talks on our YouTube channels that talk about design. There are plant lists, what do you plant, what do you choose, what's appropriate for shade and sun and pot sun under trees and under watch shrubs. I mean, there are lots of resources out there today that address the second bullet. The third step is you do have to go beyond this. You have to learn how to capture and store more rainwater on your property. Whether you have a 10 by 10, little sidewalk strip, or whether you have, 5 acres, you can stop. You can slow down the water. If your rainfall has gone from 20 inches a year to 10 inches a year, you can implement strategies that will enable you to capture and store more rainwater, stop it. Reuse water in your housing system. So there are strategies that will enable all of us to do this kind of stuff. So anyway, so this is the background. So let's talk about how to actually sheet mulch your lawn and how to turn it into a great area that will accept native plants. And you can do this. If you do it now, you can have a beautiful space for planting this fall. Come to our October plant sale, get your plants, and that'll be a great time to put them in. I just wanted to say that I do have a handout, and I think Vivian will someone will put it on the website next to the talk link somewhere. So you will be able to download that. So almost everything that I'm going to say now is going to be on that handout. So, feel free to just listen and not write notes. I think it would probably be okay. Okay, so sheet mulching or sheet composting is just 4 simple steps. This is the easiest way to do it. First, cut your grass low, cover it with cardboard or 5 sheets of newspaper. 5 sheets is essential, no more, no less. Throw about 2 to 3 inches of mulch on top of the cardboard or the 5 sheets of newspaper. And then, if this is the dry season, as it is, you do need to wet this area a little bit, about once a week or so for 2 to 3 months, because you need moisture, as you know, to aid the composting process, to aid the microorganisms and the bacteria and the worms do their job to turn the green, nitrogen-rich grass into compost. So this is it. This is all you really have to do. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to dive into some of the details. And I have to say that these details are only needed, if you want to go and spend more time on this project, do other things, do more, make your soil richer, make your soil, if you think you have really poor soil and if you want to enhance it, make it better, or if you have really heavy clay soil like I did, then do all the stuff that I'm going to tell you in the longer method now. Otherwise, this is the simple. I just thought you might be interested to see my meadow from the other side. This is from, looking towards the house from the top of the spa, I believe I was standing here. And this photograph was taken just about a month ago, maybe end of May, early June. There's a couple of things still flowering there. There's a desert apricot mallow on the right, the little orange flower, and there's some hookers, evening primrose on the left. This is evening time, and this flower blooms in the evening. The tall yellow flower on the stalk. Okay, so we had 4 steps. So I do have step 0 here in the details. You can sheet mulch any time of the year. I sheet mulched end of September. In a somewhat rainy winter, actually. The winter of 2009 was somewhat rainy. It wasn't a dry winter. Now, a lot of people told me that it would not be very successful, it's going to be too wet, and it was the best time for me to do it. And I think the grass composted quite nicely in 4 months, and by early February, I was able to get a lot of my plants in. So if you're sheet mulching in the fall, winter, or early spring, then you can plant at the same time. I didn't do that because I was unsure. It was my first time sheet mulching, and I was, viewed it as a scientific experiment to see what would happen. Would it succeed in the winter? And it did, actually. If you are sheet mulching now or in late springtime, then my advice would be, don't plant now because it's too hot. Sometimes native plants just do better when you plant when it's cooler, when there's going to be more rain. So just sheet mulch your lawn now and wait until October or November to do the planting. If you are planting at the same time as you're sheet mulching, and if you are going to put some really big pots in the ground, like 5 gallons or bigger, which I typically don't recommend, because it's better to start the plants small and let them establish the root system better in the soil directly than in transplanting from a big pot. But sometimes, someone wants to, get started with something that looks a little bigger, higher. So dig your holes in the grass and plant these big pots, the plant in the big pot a little bit higher before you start the sheet mulching process. Then move on to step 1. So if your grass is still green, as many of your grasses could be green if you're doing it now, then cut the grass low and leave the clippings back in there. So the grass provides the nitrogen. So sheet mulching, is just a way of composting. So you get your green material from the grass and you get your brown material from basically the newspaper or the cardboard. But if your grass is already turned brown, even though the color is brown, it still has the higher nitrogen content in it. Then don't try to mow it, don't do anything. You can just go right on the brown grass, however tall it might be. If it's really tall, I know some people who have 2 foot, 3 foot high grasses, then you would have to cut it somehow, maybe weed whack it in early morning time before it gets too hot, before you start sheet mulching. If you have a lawn area that has sprinkler heads in it, mark them with a flag, because once you've sheet mulched it, you will lose track of where the sprinkler heads are. And the reason you may want to know where the sprinkler heads are is, it may be an easy way to wet the area down during the hot summer, about once a week. And you want to make sure that you make some space around it so they can come up and they can sprinkle. Or alternately, later on, you may want to convert these sprinkler heads into drip heads and, be able to run a drip system. So mark the sprinkler heads. Now, this is a good time to take all the leaf compost and other leaf litter and other things that you have in your house and just spread it over the dry grass or the green grass. The only exception is if you have some leaves, certain trees have leaves that are very thick and waxy, and they don't compost really quickly, and they will mat together and not allow water or air to go through. Don't use those, or you can put them in a barrel and run a weed whacker through it to cut it up. And that's one way to chip up the leaves and use them. So just another detail is if you are sheet mulching right next to a walkway or a driveway, I learned this the hard way. Cut a 6-inch strip of grass along the edge, maybe about 2 to 3 inches deep, so that when you sheet mulch, you don't have a raised area right next to the walkway and then have to constantly deal with, the mulch flowing out, getting pushed out onto the walkway and driveway, having to constantly sweep it back. It kind of keeps it more level and out of your driveway. It's just it's a nuisance otherwise. This helps you maintain it a little easier. So a couple of pictures. This is what a portion of my grass looked like this, and you see the orange flag. I was trying to mark my sprinkler system. There was a certain area of my grass that I was still a little green. I guess some of it was under the shade of a Chinese elm tree that was in our backyard at that time. And I had not done anything with the lawn area that summer. So you can see the grass is kind of half dead, half clumpy. I did have a push mower at the time, which is what we used to use. I or my son would mow the lawn this way. Didn't use any machines. And so I just took the push mower and I cut this grass down low and left the clippings right there. Took the bag away so it wouldn't go into the bag. Here's just another example of where I was marking. This is my edge. There's a flagstone walkway all around the circle. And I regret at that point not having cut the 6-inch strip along the side and made the whole level go down a little at the edge. It would have just been a bit more convenient. Anyway, so here's the optional details. Before you spread the newspaper, after you cut the grass and put some compost, extra compost or leaves or whatever you had around over there, you could wet the area a little bit. You can also spread some chicken manure, for example, for extra nitrogen. If you have, if you live near a chicken farm and you can have easy access to chicken manure, then that's a good way to do it. If you're planting fresh plants at the same time, just be careful with that because chicken manure is pretty strong. It can burn the roots of your plants if it's not aged for at least a year, so watch out. But chicken manure is a good thing to add simply because in addition to nitrogen, it also has other micronutrients and nutrients like potassium, etc. And it adds to the ability of the soil to hold water. An alternate to chicken manure that is not manure based is actually alfalfa, if you have access to that. You can also add about an inch of good compost at this stage, right on top of the green or the brown grass before you put the newspaper down. What this will do is this will quicken the composting of your grass. So here's actual step 2. This is when you're spreading your newspaper or your cardboard. I use newspaper simply because both we and I had a neighbor at the time were buying newspapers, and I had access to a lot of newspaper just by collecting it for a few months and asking my neighbor for hers. And I just didn't have access to a lot of cardboard. 2009 was pre the high use of Amazon and its cardboard use. So to find cardboard those days, you had to really go to the back, areas of stores like Safeway and so on. And, it was just easier for me to use newspaper. And, it came with some challenges, as you'll see in the photographs coming up. Overlap it so you leave no gaps. What you're trying to do is you're trying to create a layer of a brown material over your green material that also helps in capturing and holding the warmth or the heat generated by the composting process. That's what you're trying to do with the cardboard and newspaper. So you wet the thing down, you put the cardboard on top, the composting starts underneath, and the cardboard and the newspaper doesn't break down immediately. Therefore, it really helps to hold the heat in. And in my case, it helped to hold the heat in even in the winter months. So it really helped. Now, if it is windy, you may need to wet the newspaper or throw some compost on it to weigh it down. So it turns out that we started on a windy day. So here we are trying to put 5 layers of compost, and you can see these pieces of the newspaper flying in the air there. We had a hard time holding it down. Then I started throwing some compost on top of the newspaper to hold it down while we went around. So this was challenging. My husband and I and my son were doing this, and the area was it's reasonably large. So we didn't finish that first day. So this is how far we got on the first day. So we managed to get newspaper, and we had a little bit of cardboard, as you see at the far back there. Down, I threw some compost all over it, and I also threw some cuttings from, it looks like my artichoke plant at the time. I can see the dried big flowers and so on. Some leaf litter here on this side and some soil or compost on top. And then I ran the sprinkler to wet the whole thing down so the wind wouldn't blow it all away and it would start to stick. So next day we could come back and finish the process. So if you want to further enrich your soil, this is entirely optional, is you could throw some oyster shell powder over this area. What oyster shell is basically, oyster lime, it's 35% calcium. and it's a byproduct of the seafood industry. It does help in multiple ways. There have been some studies that have shown that it helps some of the beneficial bacteria in the soil. And you know, in the long term, it can be good for, you know, the health of your soil. This is also the time, if you're doing the planting at the same time, simultaneously, to plant the smaller plants, you know, so they don't disappear, so that you didn't plant, you planted the big ones, but the small ones planted initially would have disappeared under all this stuff. So now you dig a hole, make some holes, and plant some of the small stuff. Again, I didn't really want to do this. I didn't want to dig through the newspaper and the compost and the lawn and everything to do this. So I thought it was much easier to do the composting first, and it makes it so much easier to dig the holes and plant. I recommend that, but if you want to plant at the same time, you could do it now. So I had very heavy clay soil, you know, living in Palo Alto. Soil is, I would dig a, you know, 1 foot deep hole, 1 foot by 1 foot hole, fill it with water, and sometimes that wouldn't even drain overnight. You can see that I had compacted heavy clay soil. So I decided that I was going to add a substantial amount of compost and mixed with some topsoil on my newspaper. So this is what we did. So I had landscaping company, I forget which one now, this was a long time ago, dumped, you know, 5 yards or 6 yards of compost in my driveway, and we wheelbarrowed it to the back, and I covered the whole area with this. But as I said, this is entirely optional. You know, you shouldn't feel like you need to do this. This is not necessary. I just thought, I hate my soil. It's just hard pan clay. I want to do what I can at this stage to try to make it more, you know, fertile, more usable. And so I did it. Now, I do not have a photograph of the next step, which is put some mulch or wood chips over the entire area now and allow the composting process to happen. So I did call a tree company and asked if they would bring me wood chips that they would otherwise be taking to the dump. I also requested that they not bring me diseased wood chips. And I said, you know, if you have wood chips from a redwood or some other tree, not an oak, I would appreciate that. And so I didn't get the wood chips right away. They told me that they would let me know when they can bring some over. So I think it took a week or two for them to bring some wood chips over and dump it in my front yard. And so we wheelbarrowed that again to the back and spread it over the sheet composted area. So that's what I did. So if you're getting free wood chips from a tree company, make sure you're talking to a good tree company. Make sure you're talking to the arborist, and you say, I would really appreciate it if you don't bring over any diseased trees, wood chips. I would like some good chips. Now, if you don't like the look of wood chips, then what you can do is you can buy some mulch. So go 2 inches of wood chips and just spread about 1 inch of garden store bought, you know, 1/2 inch, say bark mulch over the top. So the whole area has a prettier look than just the wood chip look. If this is the dry season, so if you decide to sheet mulch your lawn this weekend, it's pretty dry, then you will need to wet this down about once a week with some water. This aids the composting process, and it's water that is well worth the use. I mean, unless you have an acre of a lawn, I think the water that you would use on a weekly basis to just wet it down just enough Shouldn't be a big deal. And do it in the late evening time so the water has time to soak through the newspaper or cardboard, soak down into the grass area to provide the needed moisture for the composting to happen. And we have enough heat now that, the combination of some moisture and the reflected heat and the contained heat rising from the composting process itself with the newspaper holding it down should work really well for you and give you a good area to plant come October timeframe. So when is sheet mulching not possible or difficult to do? So if the season is too wet, and as you know, sheet mulching is basically composting, right? So a lot of you know about composting. If the compost is too wet, then the process becomes anaerobic and it doesn't really work that well. I don't know if you decide to do sheet mulching this October or November, we have a really wet winter, then not sure how it would actually turn out. In my case, it turned out okay. And I think it turned out okay because I did this in late September, and I don't think it really started raining until about December. So my lawn had about a month to 2 months to actually get the process going and started before the excess rain came down. So it worked out. All it means is, if it's too wet, well, you have to see. If it's too dry, then you do have to provide some water. And if you're in a severe drought and your city says, your county says you have to cut down your water use, then it will just take a bit longer. If you have soil with a very high clay content, or if it's very sandy, then it perhaps needs more organic matter and more time. In my situation, I did use more compost because I thought my soil was just too high clay, and I wanted to do something about that at the time that I was sheet mulching, rather than add compost at the time that I was planting. And so my whole meadow, I think now, is doing much better because of that. There are the standard question that people ask, sheet composting, sheet mulching talk is, I have Bermuda grass, what do I do? Well, you cannot sheet compost Bermuda grass. You can't kill it that way. I don't know how many of you have Bermuda grass, but if you do, the process of removing it is very tedious. It's very time consuming. You just have to dig it out bit by bit and make sure that you leave none of the rhizome, the root system under the soil, and you don't leave any of the stolons, which is the grass that's visible above the green part. You don't leave any piece back. So you could use a screen the soil out, make sure none of the grass falls through, put it in garbage bags and send it to the landfill or burn it or something. Now, I don't want to go into the detailed process of how to get rid of Bermuda grass, because I don't want to repeat what is nicely described in the UC Davis website on integrated pest management. So they have a whole web page on the techniques to remove Bermuda grass, which is basically what I said. You have to keep digging it out until you've got all the pieces out, essentially. So go look there. All right. So I don't have a lot more except just a couple of pictures of flowers in my meadow. This is a Clarkia amona, beautiful, beautiful big pink Clarkia flowers. This is there are so many flowers in this. So a mix of Clarkia unguiculata, which is elegant Clarkia, the tall pink stolons there. There is a sage on the left, that is Salvia brandegii, and seeing a bunch of other things. I'm seeing some blue flax on the right. and the Clarkia mona. And I think there is some blue-white grass, the little purple flowers in front. There's a couple of poppies visible also in the front. So you can, oh, and I see some white iris, Canyon snow, Iris douglasiana. So the reason I wanted to show this picture is this is a combination of big plants like the big sage, perennials, biennials, annuals. It's easy to maintain a meadow that has a mix of these flowers. So some of these annuals will reseed and will come back by themselves. And big perennial bushes provide structure to your area. And there are other plants in there like the Douglas iris, which is a low-growing green grass-like plant. And if you don't want a high maintenance area for the lawn area that you remove, you can just use a combination of low-growing plants like the iris that provide a green, with a little bit of water, they provide green all year and provide beautiful flowers in April. An easy thing to do in the year that you plant is to use poppies as fillers. So when you initially do some planting, the plants may be small. They may eventually get to be about 3 feet by 3 feet, but there's a big gap in between where you see all the mulched area. The poppies are an easy thing to grow there because you throw some poppy seeds in the fall and you get a whole bunch of poppies and native pollinators like this bee here. I was trying to get a close-up. It's a little fuzzy, but you can see how it has the little hairs and the yellow front and back. It's very pretty. That's my talk. So.
Fantastic. Thank you, Radhika.
Oh, you're welcome.
You can
Let me stop sharing. Yeah, I was just
going to then I can read off some questions for you.
Sure.
Had some good questions. A lot of them we kind of answered as they went along, but I'll go through them a little bit just to make sure that I answered them the way you would like them to be answered, or you may have additional comments.
Okay.
Let's see. So a couple people were asking about dead grass, and they stopped watering due to the drought, and could they sheet mulch? And you pretty much covered that. Yes, you could sheet mulch over dead grass.
Absolutely. Yeah. Dead grass is still compostable. I mean, it's still organic matter that will compost. And sometimes some of the grasses, I don't know, depends on which variety, they will look dead. They could go dead, but if you water them, they will come and grow back again.
Right.
So sheet composting is a good technique because that also kills the root system unless it's Bermuda grass, So there's a couple of types of grasses that you cannot kill that way, but most annual and perennial East Coast exotic grasses can be killed by the sheet composting process.
And we also had somebody ask about how it works over just bare dirt with no grass whatsoever.
Yeah, so the whole idea of sheet composting is a technique to remove grass, instead of the traditional way people removed grass, you remember, was to use a sod cutter. They'd hire a sod cutter from Home Depot or someplace and bring it home and cut the sod out and then haul it to the dump. So the idea of sheet composting is, hey, don't do that. Let's reuse that green nitrogen material and turn it into something that's beneficial for your soil. So if you already have soil, then you just have to ask yourself, what do you want to do with that soil? If you want to make it healthier, then it would be great if you can, rake up all the leaves that fall from your street tree, your neighbor's trees, ask them for their compost material, spread it over the dirt, spread it over the bare dirt, and, put some cardboard over it, put some mulch over it, and make it, make the soil healthier. Because one thing I did notice after sheet composting is the soil underneath is teeming with earthworms and, good things. So, if you just leave the bare dirt like that with nothing on it, then, it's not getting any nutrients from anywhere. So that's one way to take care of bare dirt. A second way to take care of bare dirt is to use a nitrogen fixing plant, cover crop. So, it's difficult to do it now in the summer, because you're going to need some water for it. So it's better to do it in the fall. Is just grow, clover. You can get seeds from native clovers and lupins that you can spread. Then you have a spring display of clover and native lupins. These are the fire follower plants, right? So after a fire, the first plants that come are the nitrogen fixers, and these are typically plants like lupins and clovers. So use those effectively in your bare soil because they will grow in pretty nutrient deficient soil. And if you don't have easy access to them, or if you cannot do them, then just overwinter something like fava beans. Even that will give you, fix and repair your soil. Because at the end of the winter, in early spring, cut the fava bean plant and just leave it right there. Leave it to nourish the soil, because the plants themselves are rich in nitrogen as well. So those are two techniques to use with bare soil.
Radhika, could I cut into with another reason why you want to sheet mulch bare soil?
Yes.
And that has to do with the seed bank of weeds.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
You may not see it, but if you add water for your new plants, those weeds will sprout. And that's why that way of taking the sod off, that's what I did. We took off the sod and seeded native grasses for my first meadow, which was a huge mistake. I wanted instant gratification. So in addition to the nice native grasses that came up, I also had tons and tons of weeds. Yeah. Sheet mulching kills weed seeds if you do it deep enough. Except for Bermuda grass, it kills things. And it sure slows down Oxalis, in my opinion. Slows it down enough so you can just hand pull it till it gives up.
Yeah, at least it gives you a heads up. A leg up is what I mean. Yeah, I've used sheet mulching on areas of bare soil, even areas where I don't intend to plant, like my entire side yard area where I need a walk-through path. I determined it was actually just easier to cardboard and wood chip the area, and then what weeds blow in time are super easy to pull out. It's the easiest choice I made there. And then I'm going to do a whole back area that's also bare soil, just to keep the weeds down. Good exercise too, shoveling the chips.
Yeah, in fact, I sheet mulched my 4 vegetable beds this year because I knew I wasn't going to grow vegetables this season. With the drought and so on, it's it's just easier to buy at the farmer's market, and so I just sheet mulched it. So yes, seed banks. Some seeds are pretty stubborn. But you can control a lot of them.
So we have a number of other questions. Am I the only one getting feedback?
No, I'm hearing it also.
Vivian, do you have any ideas?
I'm looking to see who's not. I'm going to mute everybody, and then you guys, Stephanie and Mara, can you unmute yourselves?
Okay, I'm trying again. Okay, good. Okay, let's go back to this list of great questions. Somebody commented when you were talking about different types of papers to use for the sheet mulching that you can use building paper. I've also used brown uncoated craft paper purchased in rolls. They've both worked really great. The one thing I've noticed is when you use a really thin material, you just have to be careful how you step on it to make sure that you don't put your foot through it. But you can.
Yeah, so
again.
right. So, I should make a comment on the newspaper as well, which is don't use the glossy, inserts in newspapers, use the black and white print, because the black and white print paper is soy-based ink. The EPA mandated no lead-based inks in 1985. So it's pretty safe to use the black and white newspapers. And I, with just experimentation, found that 5 layers is what you need, so you don't put your foot through it, and it provides the needed cover to hold the heat in. So someone has a raised hand, and I just want to comment that questions are being asked in the chat box. So if you wouldn't mind putting a question in the chat box, that would be great. Thanks. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Yeah. And then we did have a question about what other trees you tend to avoid besides just eucalyptus.
Oh yeah, so there are 2 trees. There's the London plane tree. The leaves can be quite thick and that doesn't break down very easily. And also, Palo Alto has a lot of camphor trees that's originally from China and Taiwan, planted as street trees. In general, I don't have a problem with them, except they are arsenious. There's a minute amount of arsenic in those leaves. And I don't like to use them a lot. There's a lot of it blows into my yard from a neighbor's street tree. And I use some of it, but, I don't know. I try to get rid of it. I try to put it in the city compost if I can, rather than use it in my yard. So you have to investigate the trees, the street trees around you, look them up, see what it says. For some of the leaves that are thick, there's another technique. It's been so hot that I found that if I spread these leaves out somewhere where the sun hits them every day when they're green, they turn brown, right? In a short amount of time, they turn brown. And then in just another week or 2, they actually turn crunchy. So then give your kids some boots and have them step on these crunchy leaves to break it down, and then use them as in your compost or in your sheet mulching project. So that's a good way to break down some of these thicker leaves and to reuse it. So
great.
Yeah.
And we had a question about your meadow. Once your meadow is established, do you have to water it in summer?
Yes, I mean, I do water it in the summer. I have a couple of plants that need a little bit more frequent water, but it's just, I have a spice bush, and I also have, when I moved to Washington, I had a bunch of citrus plants in pots, and I moved, for lack of space, I moved my lemon into one corner of the meadow. So those are the 2 plants in the meadow that I water somewhat regularly, which means about once every 2 weeks. And the rest of the meadow, I may give it about once a month of water, because that makes it looking a little fresh. And it helps wash the dust off the leaves, so the plants do better if they can do photosynthesis better. So it really helps to kind of water off and dust off your plants about once a month or so in the summer.
Great.
Or in the winter if it's not raining.
Yeah, on a dry January.
Right, yeah.
Let's see. Oh, we had a question from YouTube, but I think you already answered it. I'm just going to cover it quickly. They asked if you can use sheet mulch directly on the soil, and the answer to that was yes. If you have patches where you've removed turf, no problem. The next question here is, when planting after sheet mulching, you dig the hole. I think this is a comment, but let me read it. When planting after sheet mulching, you dig the hole to plant your small plant, but with 3 to 4 inches of mulch all around, sometimes you have to plant the plant in a sinkhole, because otherwise you'd need to add enough soil to get the plant above the sheet mulch. So basically, I think it's a question of, when you're adding that layer of mulch, how do you not get your plants buried too low?
Yes. So you do have to push the mulch away from your plants. You know, as you know, a lot of the native plants don't like to be mulched right up to the stem. So you do have to keep the mulch away. And it makes sense to mix some native soil with some compost at the bottom of your hole and raise the plant up a little higher. So yeah, right.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I've done too.
Mm.
And then the next question is, when you water the plants after the sheet mulching, how do you know if the water is getting to the soil or just running down the mulch? And I guess that would depend on what watering system you're using, whether you're hand watering or whether you have irrigation, drip irrigation underneath the cardboard.
Yeah, so I would say running the drip irrigation is not an effective way to wet the sheet mulched area down, because you don't really know exactly where the water is going when you do the drip. Because the whole idea of drip irrigation is to get the water below the soil to where the roots are of a plant, right? And if you don't have plants and you're only wetting the area for the sheet composting process to quicken, then it's better to use an overhead sprinkler hose or a sprinkler system to get the water evenly distributed everywhere so it sinks down and kind of evenly provides some moisture to the whole area.
Yeah, I think this one refers to after they plant.
Oh, after
they have their individual plants and then they're trying to water them. They're just trying to monitor how the water is actually getting into the soil. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one way to use a moisture meter, if you have a moisture meter with a probe, use that next to the plant to measure how deep, the water is entering near the plants and how much moisture does the plant need, right? So, yeah.
Sorry about that. I'm got family in the background, and so I'm trying to make sure that I can have clear audio. Let's see. The next question is, can I use a layer of horse manure under my cardboard and then mulch over that?
Absolutely. Yeah. If you have stables nearby, you can use horse manure. Just be aware that fresh horse manure does need to break down before you plant into it. So it's too nitrogen rich and will burn the roots of and stems of your plant. So if you're using horse manure, just be patient. Just wait a little bit longer. Wait 6 to 8 months, before you plant. But you will have good soil at that point. So that's not a bad idea.
Great, thanks. And there's a few of them that are more about native gardening in general. I'm going to ask the sheet mulching questions first, and then we'll return to those because I think we'll have time to do everything.
Okay.
The next question is, how long did it take the hard clay or hard pan to turn into decent soil? What was your experience?
I think that's going to be a difficult question to answer because it's an ongoing process, right?
Yeah.
So I continue to nourish the soil with leaf litter. I continue to nourish the soil. I have not added any explicit compost to that area after the sheet mulching process. So I think it's important to keep the soil, keep the leaf litter under the plants, and to keep nourishing the soil that way. So it's, I'm sorry, I cannot quite answer the question, but I do have to say that once the sheet mulching was done, the soil was, it's decent enough that most of the plants that I put in there did reasonably well, There were a few plants that didn't do that well, and that specifically had to do with the pH levels that they needed and what I had. So it didn't have anything to do with the composition of the soil per se, of the compost.
Yeah, it is pretty amazing to see the process in your own garden of how soil turns from hard clay pan rock to something that's a living, breathing organism. Life can persist and persevere.
And to be honest, I haven't actually dug a big hole in my meadow recently, so I really don't know how it is.
You're gonna have to get a soil probe over there, and
I'm gonna have to check it. Yes.
One question was concerns about killing lizards or other insects that might get trapped under the newspaper. Could you speak to that?
I don't, I don't think they will get trapped under there, because I think, if you're not doing something like plastic and solarization, which actually kills everything under the plastic with the heat, I think insects can find their way out and lizards will find their way out. You don't have a tight seal on the sides anywhere. You're just laying stuff down, you're putting, mulch and stuff on top, and they can get out. And I very much doubt that you're going to be able to throw cardboard or newspaper on top of lizards. They will scramble out of there before you do that.
Yes.
So,
yeah. And it's been really amazing to me to watch how quickly the cardboard or newspaper, the product decomposes.
Yes.
Faster than you would think. It suppresses that first flush of weeds, and then it's already, decomposing, and it's done its job, and it's, on to making compost. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Next is, let's see, I want to make sure I'm not skipping anything here. We talked a little bit during your presentation about Oxalis, but we did have a question of, does sheet mulch work if you have Oxalis? Which I think you pretty much answered, and says that it helps suppress it, but it's not going to completely obliterate it. It will help you kind of get it out. If you have anything more to add to that.
Yeah. I have to say, I had a lot of Oxalis in my yard, and I had a neighbor across the street that had a ton of Oxalis as well. And so it would, I think, blow over here.
Mm-hmm.
But I have pretty much no Oxalis in my yard right now. And, it's just consistency, pulling it early, the sheet mulching, the combination of these. The thing with weeds is you have to get them at the right time. You could pull them out before they set the flower, before they, yeah.
Yeah, and what I've noticed is what weeds you do get are so much easier to pull, because they tend to, once you've suppressed that first flesh, you've taken care of anything that would have come up from below. And anything that either makes its way all the way through or blows in is within the wood chips. It just makes it easier to pull out with all that, those nice
Very
wood
easy
chips.
to pull from wood chips.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's a little more pleasurable versus trying to.
Yeah.
Stephanie, I just want to give people a heads up. It's not about Oxalis, but another mistake that I made. I used cardboard when I sheet mulched, and I took out, they were computer boxes from a friend with a computer business. And I took the staples out, and I took off what tape I could, but I couldn't get it. It was really tedious to get it all off. So I just kind of thought maybe it'll decompose. Well, it doesn't decompose. And for several years, I was frequently pulling, this cardboard disappeared.
With the plastic.
Tape didn't, so I would be pulling tape out of my mulch. So you'll save a lot of work if you get rid of the tape before you sheet mulch.
Yeah. It's in the handout that you guys can download. I do have a note in there that says, if you're using cardboard, take out all the plastic tape and the staples and everything.
Mm-hmm. And if you have a large enough area, like you're redoing your whole, chunk, and you don't have the Amazon or the Costco boxes, and you want to use the sheet rolls, that's another way to go. It's always nice to reuse something first. But if you don't have the material, the sheet rolls are good. A couple questions on Bermuda grass, and you put a really great link in your talk. So there was a YouTube question about that. And so that may have come before you put the link in there about the Bermuda grass. I thought you covered that pretty well. And yeah, a lot of other people lamenting about Bermuda grass, and I'm one of those many people who's still dealing with it after 20 years, a little bit to some extent.
Yeah.
But yeah. And what we often do is sometimes pair a double sod cutting, so basically sod cut, remove, sheet mulch very thickly. We've done, multiple layers, heavy layers of chips, and then at least, kind of like the Oxalis, whatever comes back up, you can kind of dig out and battle bit by bit versus having the whole entire area.
Having the whole thing, right? Yeah.
The main thing with Bermuda grass is to make sure you can try to get it out of the plant pit when you plant. so that you're not trying to battle it in the plants themselves, because it can take over the new plants, which is super frustrating.
Yeah, there's another point that the UC Davis website mentions, which is Bermuda grass doesn't do so well if it's heavily shaded out. So, and it needs to be shaded out with a tall tree or a shrub, not small plants, because it will compete very well with the small plants. So another technique you could use is, you saw cut or remove it from a hole and plant something that'll get thick and bushy and, make it weaker that way,
Right.
So,
yeah, I had pretty good luck in one of my lawn areas that had a fair amount of Bermuda grass, actually dealing with it with the sheet mulching, and then it just cooked it in the summer heat and hasn't really come back. So I just did a pretty extensive layer.
Nice.
Somebody asked, will sheet mulching work with crabgrass? And there are sort of two separate different types of grasses.
Yes.
Sometimes people mean crabgrass and sometimes they mean Bermuda grass, but the official crabgrass, Madeline posted back that it worked for her.
Yes, I had a fair amount of crabgrass in my backyard where I sheet mulched, and that just disappeared. We had to deal with the Bermuda, but the crabgrass was completely killed, and I never saw it again after sheet mulching.
Nice.
And by crabgrass, I mean that stuff with the that is kind of radial, and I don't know the scientific name, and it comes out in the hot weather.
I don't have a personal experience with crabgrass, but I believe you, Madeline. Yeah.
Question: are ivy leaves too thick to use for the setting?
I think some of the ivy leaves are pretty big, so they might have the tendency to mat together, and form a layer that prevents not just water, but also moisture. I mean, not just moisture, but also air from penetrating. So for the composting to happen effectively, you need moisture and air. So I would be a little careful with that. I would either do the dry it to crunchiness and step on it to break it method, or, weed whack it to break, to cut it up into small pieces method before using it. But I don't see why we shouldn't use it. It's green material, so we should use it. But you just have to find a way to use it so it doesn't become a problem to you and doesn't slow the sheet mulching. Yeah.
Hopefully not planting too many of the exposed stalks, because sometimes those can reroot.
Yes.
So you'd have to cover them up pretty well.
Right.
Sounds good.
I actually I used to have a couple of rose plants, hybrid rose in the corner when we moved in here, and I never removed them. So I had cut pieces of that and thrown it on my mowed grass when I sheet mulched, and then the rose regrew. So I had initially, in my first couple of years, I had this hybrid rose, pink rose coming up in my native meadow. It was funny.
There you go. Let's see. Are there any issues with sheet mulching under mature trees like oaks?
Oak leaves, provide a natural duff under oak trees. So I wonder if this question pertains to grass that is currently under oak trees, or is this bare earth, or, I wonder.
I think that would be, well, if whoever posted the question, if you'd like to post more information.
Yeah, if you can clarify what you're trying to actually achieve.
Yeah.
If you let the oak leaves fall and stay there, that provides what the oak needs in its natural, growing state. That's the best way to let oak trees be.
Yeah.
So if you want, if you are thinking about sheet mulching, then I'm just wondering why. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's great. So I'll see if that clarification comes through. And then the only other issue I can think of is with oaks and all trees is to make sure that you don't substantially change the level of the soil under the root zone.
Yes.
Because that can be detrimental to the health of the roots, and also making sure you don't put chips or cardboard or any other material too close to the trunk of a tree. That can also be really bad, and it can encourage rot of the tree.
Yeah, it can encourage fungal rot, right? Yeah.
Let's see, this one I have to read through and see if I understand it. Is it advisable to plant succulents after installing drip lines and the compost layer and then add 3 inches of mulch rather than pour 3 inches of mulch first over the compost and then plant succulents?
So by succulents, so the plan is to plant succulents or like cactus-like plants, I assume. So I think the question is perhaps pertains to, you know, how close to the succulents should the mulch layer come, I assume?
I
Is
think
that what it
yeah,
sounds like?
there's a lot going on. I'm not totally sure.
May I ask the question?
Sure, go ahead.
I just wanted to find out if I should plant succulents or any other plant. Can I plant right on the compost and the drip lines are there now, and then add the mulch later, rather than putting all the mulch first and then having to dig holes and maybe destroy some of the lines underneath and plant? Which one is advisable? Should I plant now? I've actually just finished adding the drip lines and the compost today. So should I now get plants and plant it now and then add the 3 inches of mulch?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. That's definitely easier to do. Yeah. Right.
Plant first.
Plant first. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then you can keep the mulch away from the base roots of the plants and, you know, keep the plants healthier that way.
Yes. And also easier to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Great. Yeah. And then if you do end up doing it the other way, where you've sheet mulched and you've got everything in place and then you're waiting until fall or waiting till a different season, you can still do it. You just have to be very careful of where your drip lines are. So just kind of carefully remove a little bit of cardboard before you dig your hole to make sure that you don't damage the plants.
Exactly.
We've
Thank you
done
so
it that way too. Yeah.
We marked our irrigation with flags.
Nice.
Yeah, I think that's what I advise everyone to do, you know, mark stuff with flags.
Yeah. Let's see. A question: what is on the ground between the plants in your meadow? How do you maintain? Oh, I'm
the irrigation line.
Okay, sorry about that. Let me do this again. What is on the ground between the plants in your meadow? How do you maintain those unplanted areas? I think this means like your bark chips or other.
Yeah, you can leave wood chips or bark chips down there. I do have some, you know, let's see. So right through kind of, you know, like a yin yang sign, I'd have a little pebble, a very small pebble walkway through my meadow. So there's a place where I can walk through if I want from one end to the other. I also have fairly thick plantings, so there are areas I cannot easily walk through. And I do use native grasses. I have, you know, I have a few, and I have, you know, one of the prominent ones that actually propagates quite nicely is the purple needle grass. You know, and it's a great grass for birds because birds will take that grass and use it to build nests and other things, and they use it for all kinds of things. So it's good to have some native grasses in your meadow for sure, other than the other plants. I also have some bare earth in my meadow with no mulch on it because, as you know, native bees nest in the ground and they appreciate having some bare earth available. So there are areas of my meadow that are, you know, where you can still see some mulch. I do need to bring some more mulch in this year. There are areas that are planted with some, you know, plugs of grass here and there. I also have a carex in a, you know, carex, I think maybe Tanacitifolia, I don't remember which one at this point, in a couple of places. And I have bare earth. Oh, and I have bulbs. So I have a ton of bulbs. They have diminished over time, but I had a lot of harvest brodea. I had alliums, which are onions, native onions. And so those spots will look bare later in the year because once the plant comes and flowers and goes away, it looks bare, but it's not bare. There are bulbs underneath.
Okay.
And also what happens as your plants mature, they cover more ground And also, if you're no longer like sweeping up all the leaves and such, I mean, I had to replace mulch early on in my garden, and now there's really only a few places where I have to pay attention to that.
Mhm.
I mean, the plants eventually sort of, if you have them, they cover the ground and they self mulch.
Yeah. They also fill in, for example, I have Solidago californica, the yellow flowers that flower in the late summer because they provide color in the meadow in the late summer. And it's just slowly, it started as, one by one, like a single or two plants. And now it's covering an area that's about 7 or 8 square feet. They've slowly spread themselves out. So, yeah.
Okay, great. Well, it is 8:56 and we have 2 more questions. So we'll try to get these last 2 in. The first one is a clarification of the oak tree question. It is, they actually have lawn underneath their oak trees. And so they're thinking about whether they can sheet mulch under the oak tree to suppress the lawn.
So that's an interesting question. So if the lawn is going right up to the base of the root tree and they're watering the lawn now, then that already has been a problem for the oak. So I don't know, Stephanie, what do you think? You think we should just cut that grass and get it out rather than sheet mulch it to give the oak tree a chance to be a little healthier?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple other pieces of information I would like. The first would be how mature the oak is.
That's true, yeah.
Because that makes a difference. If it's a young oak, it's a totally different scenario than if it's a very, very large, mature, and if it's a live oak versus a deciduous oak, makes a difference too. But I probably would see the site before making any determinations, but I think it's possible you could do some sheet mulching. You would probably just want to take care that you weren't creating such a wet environment that it further moistens the soil, especially during the summer. I would probably not do it during the summer because oaks don't generally want water then. Although if the lawn has been watered and is being super wet already, you're kind of trying to figure out how you transition that. So if the lawn's been super wet, it's a different choice than if the lawn has been dry for a long time as well.
I think we just saw in the chat that it's a live oak that's 50 plus years. So it sounds
perfect.
to me,
there we go. Thanks.
Yeah, so it sounds to me like it's not young, but it's not a really old oak either.
Yeah.
So it might be worth, I think, just cutting some of the grass around the oak and removing it, and just adding some regular mulch there rather than sheet mulching.
Yeah, I think the truest answer to the question is if you really wanted to get the best advice, I would consult with an arborist. That's probably what I would do to get their recommendation, because in general, having the wood chips under the tree is not an issue. And like Radhika said earlier, you want the oak litter to be the ultimate thing that's just falling and covering the ground.
Yeah.
So the main thing is the safest way to remove the lawn. And a lot of arborists will actually recommend that you don't drastically change what's been going on. If there's been lawn there for a long, long time, you don't want to just drastically change the watering that the oak has had. You may want to gradually ease it into a different watering cycle.
Right.
It kind of depends on how long the lawn was there. Some trees are adapted and they've been used to lawn for many, many years. And if it has a really strong root system, arborists may think it would be just fine to sheet mulch the area. So I probably would start there. And if you do decide to remove some lawn physically, just be super careful of roots.
Yes, I mean, a lot of the little feeder roots do come to the surface, and especially if the lawn's being watered. So, cutting the lawn out also has to be done very carefully.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hand materials only. No equipment, please.
Yes, and if you do that, and I know that if you're going to add some mulch initially to let the tree recover, the mulch layer should be no more than about 1 inch thick. That's what allows the root system to still breathe and adapt to its new situation. I think Stephanie made a good point, is the change should not be dramatic. The change should be slow. So the trees, if they're old, especially 50 plus years, can also slowly adapt to the change.
Yeah.
Last question?
Yes, someone asked if you had any good ideas for using eucalyptus chips because they have some eucalyptus trees that may need to be cut down. I was thinking pathways.
Yeah, I mean, eucalyptus chips can be used in pathways. Yeah, I mean, I think use them in your home compost bin, for a month or two and see how they turn out. I would experiment with that because I don't know. I think it depends a little bit on what type of eucalyptus tree it is. There are many different types of eucalyptus trees, as you know, and some of them are easier and some of them are not so easy. So you may have to do some experiments at home to figure out which ones are okay, which ones are not, and what you can do with it. Yes.
Very good. And last, but I think the last one was I saved to last because it was a little bit not totally related to sheet mulching, but it was about gophers and gopher control. And I think Madeline answered. The question was basically, what do you do with gophers in a native garden versus a typical lawn garden, and can you still trap them? And the answer is yes, you can. And generally, yeah, we all tend to try to tolerate them until they start digging too many plants up, and then we take further action.
Yeah, and they do, they do aerate the soil. Their tunnels actually do help the soil. So, yeah, tolerate them as long as you can.
And please only trap them. Do not use any poison.
Yes, good.
You're poisoning everything in the ecosystem when you do that.
Yeah, great point.
So was that the last one?
I think we captured anything. If I missed anything, I apologize, but I think I got it, and it is 9, so we should probably close it out.
I want to thank everyone for coming, and before we go, I want to point out, down at the bottom of the chat, you will see 3 dots, and you can save the chat if there were comments in there or links that you wanted to save. If you save chat, it will be saved onto your own computer or device. And so encourage you to do that now. So if there were links that you wanted to save. And I hope we'll see you all again at some of our other talks. And good night, and thank you all.
Thanks, everyone, and thanks for the great questions. And
thank you. Good night.
Thank you, Radhika, for your presentation.
Thanks.
Oh, this is Vivian. Just one quick question, one quick comment is that Radhika had mentioned she's going to be providing a copy of her slides, or at least part of her slides. And so if you want to get a copy of them, you can go back to YouTube in a few days. I will link them there, or also on our website on the Native Plant Lecture Series page. They'll be linked next to the description of this talk.
Yeah, I actually had a PDF of the sheet mulching process, the detailed one as well. So you can just download that, and read the details about things like, the lime and all that stuff. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, ladies.
Thanks.
Bye.
Good night.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
very much.
Good night. I'm going to be ending the session now.